I want you to think about something with me right now. I want you to pause and really consider the people you spend the most time with, the voices you allow into your mind, the energy you surround yourself with every single day. Because here's what I've discovered after decades of working with people across every continent. You never rise to the level of your dreams, you fall to the level of your standards. And the moment you decide to raise those standards, something miraculous happens. The entire atmosphere around you begins to shift. People either rise up to meet you where you are, or they naturally fall away. And I need you to understand this today because your life is quite literally waiting on the other side of this decision. You see, most people spend their entire existence trying to fit in with everyone around them. They lower their voice when they should speak up. They dim their light when they should shine. They accept mediocrity when they were designed for excellence. And they do this because they're afraid of being rejected, afraid of standing alone, afraid of what people might say when they step into the fullness of who they were created to be. But let me tell you something that changed my life forever. The greatest tragedy is not that people reject you when you raise your standards. The greatest tragedy is that you reject yourself by refusing to raise them. I've watched it happen thousands of times. Someone finally gets tired of the drama, tired of the gossip, tired of the small thinking, and they make a decision. They say, no more. I'm worth more than this. My time is worth more than this. My future is worth more than this. And the moment they make that decision, everything changes. The people who were comfortable with them being small suddenly become uncomfortable. The relationships that were built on low standards suddenly feel the strain. But something else happens too. New doors open. New people appear. New opportunities emerge that were always there but invisible to someone operating at a lower frequency. Now, I'm not talking about becoming arrogant or thinking you're better than anyone else. That's not what raising your standards means. I'm talking about finally honoring the seed of greatness that your Creator planted inside you before you ever took your first breath. I'm talking about refusing to settle for less than what you were designed to become. And when you do this, you become a living standard for everyone around you. You become a mirror that shows people what's possible. You create permission for others to step into their greatness too. Because leadership isn't something you wear like a costume, it's something you become through daily choices. It's in the way you handle criticism. It's in the way you respond when nobody's watching. It's in the consistency between what you say and what you do. I've watched countless people with incredible potential sabotage themselves simply because they never developed self-leadership. They had the talent, the opportunities, the connections, but they couldn't lead themselves through the difficult seasons. They couldn't discipline their emotions. They couldn't manage their time. They couldn't control their tongue. And so all that potential remained dormant, locked inside a person who never learned to govern themselves. Let me be very clear about something. You cannot lead others further than you've led yourself. You cannot take people where you've never been. If you haven't conquered laziness in your own life, you cannot inspire discipline in others. If you haven't managed your finances well, you cannot teach stewardship. If you haven't learned to control your temper, you cannot model emotional intelligence. This is why self-leadership is the foundation of all leadership. It's the prerequisite. It's the non-negotiable starting point. Think about it this way. When an airplane experiences turbulence, what do the flight attendants tell you? Put on your own oxygen mask first before helping others. Why? Because you're no good to anyone if you're unconscious. You cannot serve from an empty vessel. You cannot give what you don't have. The same principle applies to leadership. You must first fill yourself with knowledge, with character, with discipline, with wisdom before you can overflow into the lives of others. You must become the change you want to see. You must embody the values you want to instill. You must live the life you want to inspire. And here's the beautiful part. When you do this authentically, leadership becomes effortless. You don't have to force it. You don't have to manipulate people or use tactics. Your life becomes the message. Your character becomes the curriculum. Your journey becomes the testimony that draws others toward their own transformation. People don't follow titles. They follow courage. They follow consistency. They follow someone who has walked the path and can show them the way. And here's the profound truth that many miss. Asterisk, asterisk, leadership is always tested in the valley, not on the mountaintop. Asterisk, asterisk. Anyone can lead when everything is going well. Anyone can stand in front of a crowd when the bank account is full. when the organization is thriving, when the applause is loud. But what happens when the funding dries up? What happens when your closest team members abandon you? What happens when the vision you've been carrying for years seems impossible? Asterisk, asterisk. That's when real leaders emerge. Asterisk, asterisk. I've watched leaders crumble under pressure because they built their authority on external validation instead of internal conviction. They needed the crowd's approval. They needed constant affirmation. And the moment criticism came, the moment opposition arose, they folded like cheap furniture. But authentic leaders, they've already died to the need for applause. They've already wrestled with their doubts in private. They've already counted the cost and decided the vision is worth more than their comfort. Asterisk, asterisk. This is why preparation is not optional, it's essential. Asterisk, asterisk. You cannot give what you do not have. You cannot lead people to a place you've never been. You cannot inspire transformation if you haven't been transformed yourself. This is why I spend time alone. This is why I read voraciously. This is why I sit in silence and allow God to shape my character when no one is watching. The platform will come. The opportunity will present itself. But if you're not ready when your moment arrives, you'll forfeit your future. I've seen gifted people, tremendously talented individuals receive opportunities they weren't prepared for, and it destroyed them. The weight of influence crushed them because their character couldn't carry what their gift attracted. Asterisk. Asterisk. Leadership exposes everything. Asterisk, asterisk. It reveals what you've been building in private. It shows whether your foundation is concrete or sand. So if you're in a season of obscurity right now, don't despise it. Don't rush it. God is doing something in you that cannot be done in public. He's building your capacity. He's strengthening your resolve. He's teaching you to hear His voice above the noise of the crowd. Because when you finally step into your assignment, you won't be shaken by opposition. You won't be seduced by success. You'll know who you are and whose you are. And that knowledge, my friend, is the foundation of unshakable purpose. Let me tell you something that will challenge everything you've been taught about success. The world will measure you by what you accumulate. God measures you by what you distribute. The world celebrates what you gather. Heaven celebrates what you release. This is why so many successful people are secretly miserable. They've won the game by the wrong scorecard. I've watched billionaires break down in my office, confessing that their wealth feels empty. I've seen celebrities at the peak of fame tell me they feel invisible. Why? Because they built empires on foundations that cannot hold the weight of human purpose. They optimized for applause when they were designed for impact. You see, purpose isn't about being seen. It's about seeing clearly. It's not about making a name. It's about answering to one. When Moses stood before that burning bush, God didn't ask him what he wanted to become. God revealed what he already was. I am has sent you. Your assignment isn't about self-creation. It's about self-discovery. This is revolutionary because it means you stop performing and start revealing. You stop pretending and start presenting. The real you, not the rehearsed you. The authentic you, not the airbrushed you. And I know that's terrifying because what if the real you isn't enough? But here's the truth that will set you free. The real you is the only version of you that can fulfill your purpose. The counterfeit you might gain followers, but only the authentic you can complete your assignment. Think about it. Every seed contains the tree, but the seed must be planted in darkness, covered in dirt, and broken open before the tree emerges. You've been interpreting your struggles as evidence of failure. What if they're actually evidence of preparation? What if the breaking isn't punishment but process? What if God is developing in secret what He plans to display in public? I want you to see something remarkable in Scripture. Joseph spent 13 years in obscurity before he had one day of visibility. David spent 15 years running in caves before he sat on a throne. Moses spent 40 years in a desert before he led a nation. Paul spent 3 years in Arabia before he turned the world upside down. Do you see the pattern? The preparation was longer than the presentation. The development was more extensive than the deployment. The private training exceeded the public ministry. And here's what we miss. During those hidden years, something was happening that couldn't happen anywhere else. Joseph wasn't just surviving prison, he was learning administration, studying Egyptian culture, mastering languages, understanding systems of governance. Every day in that cell was a classroom. Every injustice was a lesson in leadership. Every betrayal was teaching him how to handle power without becoming corrupted by it. You see, if Joseph had gone straight from the pit to the palace, he would have destroyed himself. The elevation would have exceeded his character capacity. The position would have overwhelmed his maturity. God had to prepare the man before he could trust him with the mission. Listen to me carefully. Obscurity isn't God's rejection, it's God's protection. He's protecting you from a platform you're not ready to steward. He's protecting you from influence that would corrupt an unprepared character. He's protecting you from visibility that would expose your immaturity. And while he's protecting you, he's also perfecting you. In the hidden place, God is installing software that you'll need for the assignment ahead. He's building muscles you don't even know you'll use. He's teaching you languages you'll need to speak. He's giving you experiences that will become your expertise. Think about Jesus himself. 30 years of obscurity, 30 years of carpentry in Nazareth, 30 years away from the spotlight, and then 3 years of ministry that changed human history forever. The ratio speaks volumes. 10 years of preparation for every 1 year of presentation. This is why most people never reach their full potential. They rush to the platform before they've paid the price in the process. They want the microphone before they've mastered the message. They're seeking influence before they've developed integrity. But God doesn't work that way. He's far more interested in who you're becoming than in what you're doing. He knows that what you do will always be a reflection of who you are. You cannot give what you don't have. You cannot lead where you haven't been. You cannot teach what you haven't learned. I've watched it happen time and time again. Someone gets a little bit of success, a little bit of attention, and they think they've arrived. They start acting like they've mastered something they've barely begun to understand. And then, inevitably, the weight of their assignment crushes them because their character wasn't strong enough to carry it. Your preparation period is not punishment, it's protection. God is protecting you from a level of exposure you're not ready to handle. He's protecting you from opportunities that would destroy you. He's protecting your future influence by developing your present character. Think about David again. Before he ever wore a crown, he wore shepherd's clothes. Before he commanded armies, he protected sheep. Before he sat on a throne, he sat in caves hiding from a jealous king. Every betrayal, every disappointment, every moment of waiting was adding something to his character that would be essential later. The cave didn't delay David's destiny. The cave developed it. The wilderness wasn't wasted time. The wilderness was where his worship deepened, where his faith was tested, where his leadership was refined away from the spotlight, away from the applause, away from anyone who could validate him except God alone. You see, anybody can worship when they're winning. Anybody can have faith when everything is working out. Anybody can be loyal when they're being celebrated. But what happens when you're faithful and still forgotten? What happens when you're obedient but still overlooked? What happens when you're doing everything right but nothing seems to be working? That's where champions are made. Not on the platform, in the process. Not in public, in private. Not when everyone is watching. When no one is watching except the one who matters most. Because here's what I discovered about prayer and intimacy with God. It's not about performance. It's about presence. It's not about how eloquent you sound or how many people hear you. It's about whether you're real with Him. I've watched people pray prayers that sounded like poetry. Words strung together like pearls on a necklace, beautiful to hear but empty of genuine connection. And I've heard prayers that were nothing but broken whispers, grammatically incorrect, theologically unsophisticated. Yet they moved heaven because they came from a heart that was genuinely seeking God's face. Jesus modeled this for us. He would dismiss the crowds. He would leave the applause behind. He would climb mountains in the darkness just to be alone with the Father. Not because he didn't love people, but because he understood that public ministry flows from private intimacy. You see, what you do in secret becomes the substance of what you do in public. Your private prayer life isn't separate from your public calling. It's the foundation of it. It's the root system that nobody sees, but that determines whether you bear fruit or just leaves. And here's where many of us get it wrong. We think that if we can just master the public presentation, if we can just learn the right words and the right posture, then we'll be spiritual. But God is looking at something else entirely. He's looking at the midnight hours when you can't sleep and you're wrestling with him about your fears. He's looking at the morning moments when you're still in your pajamas and you're asking him for wisdom before your feet hit the floor. He's watching to see if you'll seek him when there's no audience, no applause, no one to impress. Because that's where authenticity is forged. That's where character is built. That's where you discover who you really are, not who you pretend to be. I learned this principle the hard way. There were seasons in my life when I was so busy doing God's work that I forgot to spend time with God himself. I was speaking at conferences, writing books, leading initiatives, but my personal prayer closet was gathering dust. And you know what happened? I became hollow. Successful on the outside, empty on the inside. Impressive to others, disappointing to myself. Until one day, God whispered to my spirit, "Myles, I don't need your work. I want your worship. I don't need your performance. I want your presence." And this takes us to a profound truth about dominion. Asterisk, asterisk, you cannot dominate what you don't love. Asterisk, asterisk. Let me say that again. You cannot dominate what you don't love. The word dominion and the word dominate come from the same root, but they mean very different things in God's economy. When God said, "have dominion," he wasn't saying go exploit, manipulate, use up, and throw away. He was saying go manage with the care of a lover. Go steward with the tenderness of a parent. Go cultivate with the patience of a gardener who knows every seed by name. You see, true dominion requires relationship. It requires intimacy. Adam didn't just stand at a distance and bark orders at the animals. The scripture says he named them. Do you understand what that means? He spent time with them, he observed them, he learned their nature, their characteristics, their personalities. He got close enough to know them. This is why God brought the animals asterisk, asterisk to Adam, asterisk, asterisk in the garden. Not to test his zoological knowledge, but to establish relationship. What will you call this one, Adam? What name fits its nature? This was an exercise in intimacy, not information. God was teaching Adam that leadership begins with love, not leverage. And here's what strikes me most powerfully. Asterisk, asterisk. Adam named the animals before Eve was created. Asterisk, asterisk. Think about the loneliness of that season. He's surrounded by creatures, experiencing companionship at one level, but feeling the ache of incompleteness. Yet even in his incompleteness, he doesn't abuse his authority. He doesn't lash out. He doesn't misuse his dominion. He serves, he names, he cares. This teaches us something critical. Asterisk, asterisk. Your season of preparation often comes wrapped in loneliness. Asterisk, asterisk. Before you meet your destiny, before you find your partner, before you step into your fullness, there's a season where God is testing your character in obscurity. Can you love what he's given you to manage even when it's not what you ultimately desire? Can you be faithful in the small assignments when you're dreaming of larger ones? Joseph understood this. He served faithfully in Potiphar's house even though he was destined for Pharaoh's palace. David shepherded sheep with the same devotion he would later give to shepherding a nation. The size of your current assignment is never an excuse for mediocre stewardship. Your faithfulness in the small things is the only proof God needs that you can be trusted with greater things. You see, the problem with most people is they want to be trusted with millions before they've proven themselves trustworthy with hundreds. They want to manage a corporation before they've learned to manage their own bedroom. They want to be leaders of thousands before they've learned to lead themselves through a single day with discipline and integrity. Let me tell you something powerful. God is watching how you treat the assignment you despise to see if you're ready for the assignment you desire. Every small task is a test. Every hidden moment is an examination. Every mundane responsibility is God asking you a question. Can I trust you with more? I've watched people pray for years asking God for bigger opportunities, better positions, greater platforms, and God keeps saying, I've already given you an opportunity. It's called your current situation. Master that first. You want to preach to nations? Start by being faithful to speak words of life to your family. You want to manage a business empire? Start by showing up on time for the job you have now. You want to be a famous worship leader? Start by worshiping with all your heart when nobody's watching and there's no applause. The principle is unchanging. Faithfulness in obscurity qualifies you for visibility. Excellence in private prepares you for exposure in public. Your secret discipline becomes your public reward. This isn't just spiritual theory, it's the architecture of destiny. It's how the kingdom of God operates. And here's what you need to understand. The wilderness seasons, the waiting rooms, the small beginnings, these aren't interruptions to your destiny. They are your destiny being formed. The cocoon isn't delaying the butterfly, it's creating it. The pressure isn't preventing the diamond, it's producing it. Your current limitation isn't blocking your future, it's building it. So stop despising the day of small things. Stop being embarrassed by humble beginnings. Stop apologizing for where you are. Instead, dig deep right where you're planted. Bloom with everything you've got in the garden you're in, not the garden you wish you were in. Because here's what I've discovered. The moment you fully commit to your current position, that's when transformation begins. Not when you escape it. Not when you finally get promoted. Not when you move to a different city. But when you say, I'm going to extract every ounce of purpose from right here. You see, too many people are waiting for perfect conditions to start living purposefully. They're saying, when I get that degree, then I'll make an impact. When I have more money, then I'll start that business. When I move to a better neighborhood, then I'll be happy. But that's backwards thinking. Your purpose doesn't activate when your circumstances change. Your circumstances change when your purpose activates. I've watched people turn minimum wage jobs into launching pads. I've seen individuals transform broken relationships into testimonies. I've witnessed folks take the most mundane, overlooked positions and create such excellence there that opportunity couldn't help but notice them. Why? Because they understood a fundamental principle. You're never just working a job. You're always cultivating a character. That cashier position, it's teaching you patience and people skills. That entry-level role, it's building your work ethic and attention to detail. That difficult boss, they're developing your emotional intelligence and conflict resolution abilities. Every single place you find yourself is a classroom, and you're either passing or failing based on your attitude, not your title. Let me tell you something powerful. The fastest way out of where you are is to do where you are with excellence. The quickest route to promotion is to outgrow your current position by mastering it so completely that keeping you there becomes impossible. Stop looking for the exit door and start looking for the lesson. Stop hunting for the escape route and start searching for the growth opportunity. When you bloom where you're planted, you're not settling, you're preparing. You're not giving up on your dreams. You're building the foundation for them. You're not accepting mediocrity. You're practicing excellence in obscurity so you can handle visibility later. And I'm telling you, most people miss their moment because they didn't prepare in private. They show up to the big opportunity sloppy, unprepared, half-committed, and they wonder why the door closed. God is watching what you do when nobody else is watching. He's observing your faithfulness in the small things before he releases you into the big things. That's why Jesus said, if you're faithful with little, you'll be given much. Not might be given, will be given. Your private discipline determines your public reward. Let me give you a real-world example. There was a young man I mentored years ago, brilliant guy, full of potential, and he kept complaining that nobody was giving him a platform. Dr. Munroe, when is my opportunity coming? When will people recognize my gift? And I said to him, show me what you're doing when nobody's recognizing you. He couldn't answer. You see, he wanted the spotlight, but he wasn't willing to work in the shadows. He wanted the applause without the rehearsal, the promotion without the preparation. And that's not how the kingdom works. That's not how life works. I told him, go home. Start serving somewhere nobody knows your name. Volunteer in your local community. Build something with your hands. Create content. Write. Study. Develop your craft in secret. And when you're faithful with that, when you've proven you're not doing it for recognition, but because you're called to it, then your gift will make room for you. 2 years later, that same young man had built something extraordinary. Not because he got a big break, but because he stopped waiting for permission and started working in obscurity. And guess what happened? People started noticing. Opportunities opened. Doors swung wide that he didn't even knock on. Because promotion doesn't come from the east or the west. Promotion comes from the Lord, and God promotes those who've been faithful in the hidden place. That's why I'm not intimidated by people who seem to be ahead of me. I'm not jealous of those who got promoted faster, because I know something they may not know. Their promotion came from man, but mine is coming from God. And what man gives you, man can take away. But what God gives you, no man can remove. See, when you understand this principle, you stop politicking for position. You stop schmoozing with the boss, trying to get noticed. You stop manipulating circumstances to make yourself look good. You just do excellent work in secret, and you trust God to bring you out at the appointed time. Joseph didn't send his resume to Pharaoh. He didn't campaign for the position of prime minister. He was faithful in prison, interpreting dreams for people who would forget him. But when Pharaoh had a dream that needed interpretation, suddenly everybody remembered Joseph. Suddenly, the prison became a palace. Suddenly, the forgotten became the famous. That's how God works. He's been watching you in the secret place. He's been monitoring your faithfulness when nobody else was looking. And he's preparing a platform that matches the character you've been developing in private. But here's what most people miss. The blessing isn't just for you. God has been preparing you in secret so you can serve others in public. Every season of obscurity is a season of preparation for the people you're going to impact. Your gift is not about you. Your anointing is not for your glory. Your promotion is not for your ego. It's all about positioning you to solve problems, meet needs, and transform lives on a scale you couldn't have reached from where you were. So stop rushing the process. Stop complaining about the waiting season. God is not withholding your blessing. He's perfecting your character so you can handle the blessing without it destroying you. You see, the Bible says in Ecclesiastes 3:11, He has made everything beautiful in its time, not in your time, not when you think you're ready, in His time. And that word beautiful doesn't just mean pretty, it means perfect, complete, lacking nothing. God is arranging your life in such a way that when the blessing comes, it will fit perfectly into the season you're in. I've watched people pray for wealth, and when they got it, it destroyed their families. I've seen people beg God for a platform, and when they received it, they couldn't handle the criticism and they fell apart. Why? Because they weren't ready. The gift arrived, but the character wasn't there to sustain it. Listen carefully. God will never give you something that requires a level of character you haven't developed. That would be cruelty, not love. A good father doesn't hand car keys to a 5-year-old. It's not because he doesn't love the child, it's because he does. The child must first grow, mature, learn responsibility, understand consequences. The father is waiting for the child's capacity to match the gift. And this is what breaks my heart. So many of you are angry at God for making you wait, when He's actually protecting you from yourself. You're praying, God, why haven't you opened that door? And He's saying, because you'd walk through it and fall off a cliff, I'm teaching you to fly first. The wilderness isn't punishment, it's preparation. David didn't go from the shepherd's field straight to the throne. He went to the wilderness. He was anointed as a teenager, but he didn't wear the crown until he was 30 years old. 15 years of waiting. 15 years of running from Saul. 15 years of hiding in caves, leading broken men, learning to trust God when everything looked impossible. What was God doing? He was building a king, not just giving a title, but forging a man who could carry a nation. David learned worship in the wilderness. He learned warfare. He learned that God was his only source. When he finally sat on that throne, he didn't sit there as a shepherd boy with a title. He sat there as a transformed man with the capacity to lead God's people. You want the throne? Then embrace the cave. You want the promise? Then honor the process. Stop despising the season you're in and start asking, God, what are you teaching me right here? Because I promise you, every season has a curriculum. And if you don't learn what you need to learn in this season, God will keep you here until you do. He's not cruel. He's committed to your completion. He's not punishing you. He's preparing you. I've watched people cycle through the same season over and over again, wondering why nothing changes. And it's because they never stopped long enough to extract the lesson. They were too busy complaining about the desert to notice the manna on the ground. Too busy resenting the pruning to realize it was producing fruit they couldn't carry before. Listen to me carefully. Your character must match your calling. Your integrity must be equal to your influence. And God will not release you into the next dimension until He knows you can handle it without it destroying you. That's why some of you are still in the waiting room. Not because God forgot about you, but because he loves you too much to promote you prematurely. He knows what premature success does to unprepared people. He's seen what happens when someone gets the platform before they have the foundation, the microphone before they have the message, the title before they have the testimony. And so he holds you, not to hurt you, but to help you, not to limit you, but to complete you. Because the process isn't just about getting you to something, it's about getting something out of you. The impatience, the pride, the need to control, the fear of obscurity, the addiction to applause. God's trying to deliver you from you before he delivers you to your promise. And that takes time. That takes pressure. That takes seasons you didn't sign up for and struggles you didn't expect. Because transformation doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in the crushing. It happens when the pressure is so intense that everything falls away and only what's real remains. You see, the real you isn't who you are when everything's going well. The real you shows up when the money's low, when the door closes, when the relationship fails, when nobody's watching, when the praise stops. And God needs to know who shows up in that moment. Because the promise he's taking you to will require the version of you that only the process can produce. So don't rush it, don't resent it, don't run from it. Embrace where you are right now, knowing that every delay is developing you, every setback is setting you up, and every no is protecting you from something you're not ready for yet. Because here's what I've learned through years of study and observation. The greatest leaders in history were all misunderstood in their own time. Moses was called a murderer. David was called too young. Nehemiah was called a troublemaker. Jesus was called a blasphemer. Martin Luther King Jr. was called an agitator. Nelson Mandela was called a terrorist. Why? Because they saw what others couldn't see. They heard what others couldn't hear. They felt a burden that others couldn't feel. And when you carry a vision that's ahead of its time, you will always be misunderstood by people living in their time. Let me tell you something that will change how you see rejection forever. When people reject your vision, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting what they cannot yet comprehend. And that's okay. Noah preached for 120 years and couldn't convince anyone to get on the ark. But guess what? The ark still sailed. The vision still manifested. The purpose still prevailed. You don't need everyone to believe in your dream. You just need to believe in it yourself. Because belief isn't meant to be democratic. Vision isn't meant to be validated by a vote. Purpose isn't meant to be approved by a committee. It's meant to be confirmed in your spirit and worked out through your obedience. I'm talking to someone right now who's been waiting for permission from people who will never give it. You've been waiting for your parents to understand. You've been waiting for your friends to support you. You've been waiting for your circumstances to be perfect. Stop waiting. Start walking. The permission you need doesn't come from people, it comes from purpose. I've watched people sit in waiting rooms for decades, waiting for their turn, waiting for approval, waiting for someone to recognize their talent, and they die there. Not physically, but spiritually. The dream withers. The passion fades. The potential gets buried under layers of disappointment and maybe next time. But here's what I discovered. Asterisk, asterisk, the people who change the world don't wait for permission. They take responsibility. Asterisk, asterisk. You see, permission is something you ask for when you doubt your assignment. Responsibility is what you grab when you know your purpose. There's a massive difference. When you're waiting for permission, you're essentially saying, I need you to validate my existence. When you take responsibility, you're declaring, I was built for this, and I'm moving forward, whether you understand it or not. Let me tell you about a young woman I met in Africa. She had a vision to build schools in her village. No degree in education, no funding, no government backing. Just a burning conviction that children deserve better. She started teaching under a tree. 5 children showed up the first day. The elders laughed at her. They said, who gave you authority to do this? Where's your certification? She didn't argue. She just kept teaching. 10 children came, then 20, then 50. Within 2 years, the government came to her asking how they could support what she'd built. They gave her the permission after she took the responsibility. That's the pattern throughout history. Rosa Parks didn't wait for permission to keep her seat. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't wait for approval to march. The Wright brothers didn't wait for the aviation board to authorize flight. There wasn't one. They took responsibility for their vision, and the world adjusted. Asterisk, asterisk. You have been waiting for a door to open, but you are the door. Asterisk, asterisk. Stop looking for someone to hand you the keys. You were born with them. The resources, the connections, the opportunities, they don't come to waiters, they come to walkers. They chase people who are already in motion. Because here's what most people don't understand about provision. God doesn't just provide for your needs when you sit still. He provides times along the path, times He's called you to walk. The manna didn't fall inside their tents. It fell on the journey. The water didn't spring up in Egypt. It came from the rock in the wilderness. Times after times they left. You see, when you step out, you trigger divine provision that was already prepared but dormant. You activate blessings that were waiting for your obedience. There are resources assigned to your assignment, but they only release when you move toward that assignment. Think about the widow who went to Elisha. She had nothing but a little oil. And the prophet didn't say, sit tight and pray for more oil. He said, go borrow vessels. Not a few. He put her in motion. And the oil didn't multiply until she started pouring. Action released the miracle. Movement activated the provision. That's the principle. Asterisk, heaven finances motion, not meditation. Asterisk, I'm not saying don't pray. I'm not saying don't seek God. But I am saying that at some point, faith has to have feet. Trust has to translate into steps. And when it does, you'll find that what you need shows up exactly when you need it, not before. I've seen this in my own life more times than I can count. Resources I didn't have when I started the project, connections I couldn't have predicted, doors that opened only after I was already walking toward them. Because God doesn't show you the whole staircase, He shows you the first step. And when you take it, the next one appears, and then the next, and then the next. But if you're sitting at the bottom demanding to see the entire staircase illuminated before you move, you'll wait your whole life. That's not how faith works. Faith is taking the step you can see, trusting that the next one will be there when you need it. And it always is. Always. Someone needs to hear this today. Someone's been waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect plan, the perfect circumstances. But perfection is the enemy of progress. Excellence is achievable. Perfection is an illusion that keeps you frozen. I learned this watching the great leaders of our time. None of them waited until they felt ready. None of them had it all figured out. Martin Luther King Jr. was 26 years old when he led the Montgomery bus boycott. 26. He didn't have decades of experience. He didn't have a complete roadmap for the civil rights movement. He had a calling, a conviction, and the courage to take the first step. Moses had a speech impediment and a criminal record. David was a teenager with a slingshot. Mary was an unwed mother in a culture that could have stoned her. God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. You know what I've discovered? The moments that changed my life weren't the moments when I felt most prepared. They were the moments when I felt most inadequate but moved forward anyway. When I accepted my first speaking invitation, I was terrified. My notes were shaking in my hands. My voice was trembling. But something happened when I opened my mouth and began to speak. The words came, the strength came, the clarity came. Not before, during. That's how purpose works. It doesn't give you everything up front. It gives you what you need when you need it. Manna in the wilderness came daily. Remember that. Not weekly, not monthly, daily. Because God wants you to stay dependent, stay connected, stay trusting. Stop demanding to see the whole staircase before you take the first step. Stop requiring a detailed map before you begin the journey. Faith doesn't work that way. Faith is spelled R-I-S-K. Every single time. And here's what's beautiful. Every step you take makes the next step clearer. Every door you walk through reveals another door. Every challenge you overcome prepares you for the next level. You're not going backwards. You're not standing still. You're being prepared, even when it doesn't feel like it. Let me tell you about a young man named Joseph. You remember Joseph? Sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused by a woman scorned, thrown into prison for a crime he didn't commit, forgotten by the very people he helped. Years passing in that dungeon, years of wondering, God, where are you? Did you forget about me? Was the dream even real? But here's what Joseph didn't know in that moment. Every single injustice, every betrayal, every lonely night in that prison cell was positioning him for a palace. The waiting wasn't punishment. It was preparation. God was developing in him the character he would need to manage an entire nation's economy. He was learning languages, understanding Egyptian culture, building relationships, developing wisdom, learning how to maintain integrity when no one's watching. See, if Joseph had gone straight from the pit to the palace, he would have destroyed himself. The promotion would have killed him. But the process made him ready. And when Pharaoh finally called for him, Joseph didn't come out bitter. He came out better. He didn't come out angry. He came out anointed. He didn't come out broken. He came out with a solution that would save millions of lives. That's what the waiting does. It doesn't just test you, it transforms you. It prepares you for a level of responsibility you couldn't handle in your current state. You think you're ready now, but God sees what you don't. He sees the weight of what he's about to put in your hands. He sees the pressure you're about to face. He sees the attacks that are coming. And in his love, he's saying, not yet. Not because I don't love you, but because I do. I need you to understand something crucial. The size of your waiting determines the size of your assignment. Small assignments come quickly, but the assignments that will change generations, those require preparation. Moses waited 40 years in a desert before he could lead a nation out of bondage. David was anointed king as a teenager but didn't sit on the throne until he was 30. Jesus himself waited 30 years before 3 years of ministry that changed all of human history. Your waiting is not wasted time. It's preparation time. It's character building time. It's foundation laying time. And I need you to understand something that will completely change how you view this season. God is more interested in who you're becoming during the wait than he is in what you're going to do after the wait. Because if he gives you the promise before you're ready for it, the promise will destroy you. Think about it this way. If you give a child the keys to a Ferrari, you haven't blessed that child. You've endangered that child. The car itself isn't the problem. The problem is the mismatch between the gift and the maturity level of the recipient. And so many of us are angry at God for withholding things from us that would actually kill us if we received them prematurely. Joseph needed those years in prison because he was being transformed from an arrogant dreamer into a humble administrator. When he finally stood before Pharaoh, he didn't say, I can interpret dreams. He said, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. That's maturity. That's humility. That's what the waiting produced in him. You see, immaturity focuses on the gift. Maturity focuses on the giver. Immaturity asks, when will I get what I want? Maturity asks, who do you want me to become? And the waiting season is designed to transition you from immaturity to maturity, from focusing on your agenda to surrendering to God's agenda, from trying to use God to get what you want to allowing God to use you to accomplish what he wants. Here's another critical insight about waiting. During this season, God is not just working on you, he's working on your environment. He's positioning people. He's removing obstacles. He's opening doors that need to be opened and closing doors that need to be closed. He's orchestrating circumstances that are completely beyond your control or awareness. You see, while you're focused on the visible battle, God is fighting the invisible war. While you're trying to figure out plan A, God is already implementing plans B through Z. You don't need to see the whole picture, you just need to trust the artist who's painting it. And here's what fascinates me about God's behind-the-scenes work. He never wastes anything. Every delay has a purpose. Every detour is actually a divine appointment. Every closed door is God's protection from something that would have harmed you. You were angry because that job didn't work out. But God knew that company was going to collapse 6 months later. You were frustrated because that relationship ended. But God knew that person would have derailed your destiny. I've learned that God's no is just as much a blessing as his yes. Sometimes the greatest miracle is what God prevents from happening rather than what he makes happen. You don't celebrate the accidents you never had, the diseases you never contracted, the wrong decisions you almost made but something stopped you at the last minute. God's protection is working overtime in your life and you don't even realize it. Think about it like this. You only see the front side of the tapestry where the threads look random and chaotic, but God sees both sides. He sees the beautiful picture that's emerging from what looks like a mess to you. Your confusion is actually confirmation that something bigger than your understanding is taking place. This is why anxiety is so unnecessary for the believer. You're worried about things that God has already handled. You're trying to solve problems that God solved before you even knew they existed. You're carrying burdens that were never meant for your shoulders. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." That's not just a nice quote for a greeting card. That's a practical invitation to shift the weight from your back to His. Here's the shift I want you to make. Stop trying to be God's advisor and become God's student. Stop trying to inform Him of your situation and start asking Him to inform you of His perspective. Stop presenting Him with your plans for approval and start asking Him to reveal His plans for your obedience. This is the prayer posture that changes everything. Lord, teach me. Lord, show me. Lord, open my eyes to what I cannot see. Lord, give me understanding beyond my natural comprehension. When you pray this way, something remarkable happens. You stop wrestling with God and start walking with God. You stop demanding outcomes and start discovering opportunities. You stop trying to change your circumstances and start allowing your circumstances to change you. I've watched this transformation happen countless times. I've seen people who were desperate, anxious, fighting in prayer suddenly become peaceful, confident, surrendered. Not because their situation changed overnight, but because their perspective shifted. They stopped seeing God as someone who needed to be convinced and started seeing Him as someone who needed to be consulted. Let me give you a powerful example. There was a businessman in our congregation who lost everything during an economic crisis. Everything. His company collapsed. His investments disappeared. His reputation was damaged. He came to me angry, frustrated, questioning God. Why would God let this happen to me, he demanded. I've been faithful. I've been generous. I've served Him. I looked at him and said, maybe God is trying to teach you something you couldn't learn any other way. He didn't like that answer. He wanted sympathy. He wanted agreement that God had made a mistake. But I told him, go back and ask God what He's trying to show you. Stop telling Him what He should do for you and start asking Him what He's trying to do in you. 6 months later, that same man came back to me with tears in his eyes. Dr. Munroe, he said, losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to me. I was building my own kingdom and calling it God's work. I was serving my own ambition and calling it ministry. God had to strip everything away so I could see what I'd become. Now He's rebuilding me from the foundation up, and this time it's really His work, not mine. That's the power of changing your prayer posture. When you shift from demanding to declaring, something supernatural begins to happen in your spirit. You start to see with different eyes. You begin to hear with different ears. The things that once consumed you, the approval of others, the fear of failure, the need to prove yourself, they lose their grip. I've watched this transformation happen in people's lives over and over again. There was a young entrepreneur in our church who came to me exhausted. He'd built a successful business, but he was miserable. Every morning he'd pray, God, help me make this deal. God, give me this contract. God, let this investor say yes. His entire prayer life was about getting God to support his agenda. Then one day I challenged him. Stop asking God to bless your business. Start asking God what business He wants you in. That question wrecked him. For 3 months, he wrestled with it. He discovered that God had never called him to that industry at all. The business was profitable, but it was outside of his purpose. He eventually sold everything and started over in a completely different field, one that aligned with the burden God had placed in his heart years before, a burden he'd ignored because it wasn't as glamorous or immediately profitable. Today, he has less money, but infinitely more peace. And ironically, that less profitable calling is now impacting thousands of lives and generating more income than his first venture ever did. That's what happens when you stop trying to get God to endorse your plans and start discovering His. You find the place where your deepest fulfillment meets the world's greatest need. You find the intersection where your gifts, your passion, and God's purpose collide. But here's what most people miss. Changing your prayer posture isn't a one-time event. It's a daily discipline. Every morning you have to make the conscious choice to surrender again, because your flesh will try to take the throne back. Your ego will whisper, you've got this figured out now. You don't need to surrender today. That's when you're most vulnerable. This is why the greatest saints in history, the men and women who walked in extraordinary power, never stopped being beginners. They never graduated from surrender. Paul, after decades of ministry, after writing half the New Testament, still said, I die daily, not I died once. daily. Every single morning, he laid himself down again. You see, maturity in the kingdom isn't measured by how much you know. It's measured by how quickly you surrender. A spiritual infant fights for control. A mature believer releases it before the struggle even begins. They've learned that the fight itself is the problem. The moment you're wrestling for control, you've already lost because you're operating in your own strength instead of his. And here's what makes this so challenging in our culture today. We've been trained to believe that independence is the goal, that self-sufficiency is success. The entire system around you is designed to make you believe you don't need anyone, including God. Financial independence, emotional independence, the self-made man. The self-help industry generates billions, telling you that you have everything you need inside yourself. But kingdom thinking is the exact opposite. Kingdom thinking says you have nothing inside yourself that matters eternally. Everything of value comes from connection to the source. A branch doesn't develop independence from the vine. That's called death. The branch's entire identity, its purpose, its fruit-bearing capacity, all of it flows from staying attached. So when you wake up tomorrow and you feel that resistance, that voice saying surrender is for the weak, recognize it for what it is. The world's programming trying to keep you from your destiny. Because the world needs you weak. It needs you exhausted, striving, running on fumes, measuring yourself by metrics that mean nothing in eternity. But God is calling you to something different. He's calling you to the supernatural rest that comes from letting him carry what you were never meant to hold. And when you do, when you finally release that crushing weight of self-management, you'll discover something remarkable. The abundant life Jesus promised was never on the other side of your achievement. It was always on the other side of your surrender. Because here's what most people miss about surrender. It's not a one-time event. It's a daily practice. It's a moment-by-moment choice to trust God instead of trusting yourself. You don't just surrender once and you're done. You surrender your morning when you wake up anxious. You surrender your afternoon when the plans fall apart. You surrender your evening when the emotions threaten to overwhelm you. The disciples had to learn this. After the resurrection, after Pentecost, after seeing miracles with their own eyes, they still had to choose daily surrender. Paul, the great apostle, said he died daily. What was he dying to? His own way, his own wisdom, his own control. And this is where the real transformation happens, my friend. Not in the big dramatic moments of faith, but in the small, quiet decisions to let go. When you choose to surrender your worry instead of rehearsing it for the 100th time. When you choose to surrender your offense instead of building a case in your mind. When you choose to surrender your timeline instead of forcing doors that God has closed. The yoke wasn't just an invitation for tired people. It was a revelation of how God's kingdom operates. In the world's kingdom, you fight for position. In God's kingdom, you surrender to find it. In the world's kingdom, you protect yourself. In God's kingdom, you yield and discover divine protection. In the world's system, rest is what you earn. In God's system, rest is where you start. Think about a child learning to swim. At first, they panic, they thrash, they try to control every movement, and that's exactly when they sink. But the moment they relax, the moment they trust the water and the instructor, they begin to float. They discover that the water was designed to hold them all along. That's the yoke. That's the partnership Jesus offers. You stop thrashing in your own effort, and you discover that his grace was designed to carry you. His strength was meant to uphold you. His wisdom was always sufficient for your journey. This is why rest isn't weakness, it's revelation. When you finally stop trying to prove yourself, you start to discover yourself. When you cease striving for significance, you begin to recognize the significance already placed within you before you took your first breath. I've watched this transformation happen countless times. A businessman who collapsed under the weight of his empire, only to rebuild on the foundation of divine rest rather than human ambition. A mother who stopped trying to be perfect and discovered she was already enough in God's eyes. And that realization made her more present, more patient, more powerful in her parenting than all her striving ever did. The shift happens when you realize that Sabbath isn't about stopping work, it's about starting from a different place. It's about operating from rest rather than working toward rest. The world teaches you to labor until you earn a break. Kingdom principles teach you to break first. then labor from that place of wholeness. Think about it this way. God didn't create Adam and Eve and then tell them, work for 6 days and on the 7th day you can rest. No. Their very first full day of existence was a Sabbath. They woke up to rest. They began in completion. They started their human journey by watching God work, by receiving from His hand, by learning that their value wasn't in their productivity, but in their position as His beloved creation. This is revolutionary. You don't work to earn God's approval. You work from a place of already having it. You don't strive to become worthy. You rest in the worthiness He's already declared over you. Every assignment, every task, every calling flows from this fountain of rest, not toward it. And here's what happens when you finally embrace this truth. Your work becomes worship instead of warfare. Your efforts become expressions of gratitude rather than attempts at validation. You stop performing for an audience and start partnering with your Creator. The burden lifts not because the load got lighter, but because you finally let the right shoulders carry it. I can tell you from personal experience, the most productive seasons of my life didn't come from working harder. They came from resting deeper. I want you to understand something profound. Rest is not the absence of activity. Rest is the presence of peace in the middle of your activity. You can be still and stressed, or you can be moving and at rest. The condition of your soul matters more than the condition of your schedule. Jesus showed us this perfectly. He spent 40 days in the wilderness, not because He was escaping work, but because He was preparing for it. He withdrew to pray before every major decision. He rested before storms, not after them. He understood something most of us miss. The strength you bring into the battle is determined by the rest you experience before it. I've watched people burn out chasing things God never assigned them. They're exhausted, not because they're doing too much, but because they're doing the wrong things with the wrong people at the wrong time. They've confused motion with mission, activity with anointing. And the saddest part, they think their exhaustion is a badge of spirituality. They believe God is impressed by their weariness. Let me tell you what impresses God: obedience. And sometimes obedience looks like stopping. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is rest when everyone else is rushing. Sometimes faith sounds like, no, I'm not available that day. Sometimes strength looks like a closed door, a silent phone, and a peaceful Sunday afternoon with nothing to prove to anyone. The reason why most people can't rest is because they're afraid of what they'll discover in the silence. As long as you're busy, you don't have to face the questions. As long as you're moving, you don't have to feel the emptiness. As long as you're producing, you don't have to confront your worth. But rest forces you to be still, and in that stillness, you either meet God or you meet yourself. And honestly, both can be terrifying until you realize they've been waiting to heal you all along. This is why the enemy doesn't mind if you're busy. He'll even applaud your productivity. Because busy people don't ask dangerous questions. Busy people don't sit long enough to hear God's voice correcting their direction. Busy people mistake motion for progress and noise for purpose. But when you rest, you create space for recalibration. You create room for God to redirect you before you waste another decade building the wrong thing. You give the Holy Spirit permission to whisper, that's not your assignment anymore, or you're carrying someone else's burden, or I never asked you to prove yourself this way. And here's something that'll challenge you. Rest exposes what you've been using work to avoid. Some of us stay busy because we're running from difficult conversations. Some of us overwork because we're afraid to grieve what we've lost. Some of us refuse to slow down because silence brings up the pain we've been medicating with achievement. Rest doesn't just reveal your exhaustion. It reveals what you've been exhausting yourself to escape. This is why true rest requires courage. It takes bravery to stop performing long enough to feel what you've been postponing. It takes faith to release control and trust that everything won't fall apart without your constant intervention. It takes humility to admit that you're not the glue holding everything together God is. And when you finally surrender to that rest, something miraculous happens. The things you thought would collapse without you don't. The people you thought needed your constant rescue find their own strength. The ministry you thought depended on your burnout continues because it was never about you in the first place. Rest reveals that you were never the savior. You were always the servant. And servants are most effective when they're connected to the source, not disconnected from it through exhaustion. So let me leave you with this final truth. The seventh day wasn't a suggestion. It was a pattern. It was God modeling for you what sustainability looks like. Even He who never grows weary chose to rest, not because He needed to, but because He wanted to establish a rhythm that would protect you from destroying yourself in His name.